monthly presentation with 5-Star Chemicals. We have a really fun, exciting, very interactive presentation today, so be sure to stay active in the chat over to the right. A couple of other housekeeping things. If you do have a specific question for the speakers that you would like answered, you can use the Ask a Question prompt at the bottom of the screen. So there's Ask a Question. That way everyone can see it and we can make sure we get through all the questions at the end. Please tell us where you're tuning in from on the right for the chat. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mike Shepard from On Tap and Axe from Highside Brewing, and they will be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of owning a brewery and operating. So I will turn it over to them.
Nice. All right, welcome everybody. It's great to see everybody logging in on the right-hand side. We do love seeing where everybody's from. Right now, I think we have the farthest person is Italy, but we have Kansas, California. We don't know what is NKY. Let's see, San Francisco, Colorado, BCCA, British Columbia,
yeah,
Atlanta, Mexico, Chicago. Hey, Scotland. There you go. We have a little Scotland on the board.
Cheers there to Greg from Chicago. That's my hometown. Just got back.
Oh, hey, Aaron, you were right. Northern Kentucky. Good guess, Aaron, out there too. So, Louisiana.
Nice.
Texas. There we go. Awesome. We really appreciate everybody joining us today. I really appreciate the collaboration we had with 5-Star Chemical and Aaron. It's awesome. This is our third podcast. This one is titled The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, podcast about owning a brewery. So we're going to scare you to death that you will not open a brewery. Just kidding. It's really to help you set up for success, and that's really what we want to do. On my left here is a good friend and brewery partner with On Tap Credit Union, David Axelrod, also known AKA Axe, not AXE, not the hatchet, just Axe. But cheers and thanks for joining us.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. I hope everybody else took a drink because we're here to have beer and talk and have a lot of fun. There you go.
Was Robert Deal, yeah.
Yeah, a little.
Hey, Robert.
People from Breckenridge. Let's do a quick introduction. Kind of talk about you, your education. Let's talk about Highside Brewery and Barbecue. And we have 4 delicious beers we are sampling today.
Bobby Axelrod. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, no, I am not the Axe from Billions. So background, I always say I'm really a ski instructor and a raft guide. I did that for 15 years. That was a lot of my education. Undergrad, I went to CU and got an undergrad in history and psychology, double majored there. And then later I did an MBA in sustainable business at a place called Breckenridge Graduate Institute outside of Seattle, with the idea of wanting to start my own business, and specifically wanting to do a business that contributed positively to the community. And landed in
beer.
Yeah,
right.
Beer was a great way to do that. I was fortunate enough at school to meet Kim Jordan from New Belgium.
Oh yeah.
Hear their stories, see all the great stuff they did environmentally, socially. My entrepreneurship professor, who became a good friend, was on their board, so I had a lot of insight into what had happened with them, their history, and that kind of thing. And so that
we're kind of going into our first question already. So let's talk a little bit about Highside Brewery and Barbecue. Your locations, your beer, what's going on?
Yeah, so we're in the middle. I said earlier to Michael, I feel like an octopus right now. I'm in the middle of moving my manufacturing facility. We just bought 2 buildings in Fairplay, which is South Park, Colorado, and we're moving the manufacturing there. On Tap helped us with the equipment loan to get a new brew house and new fermenters and do all that. And so we're in the middle of doing that. We just opened a tap room over there as well. We also have affordable housing there for our brewer and
guy who's upstairs.
Guy who's operating the food truck. We're about to open a tap room in Breckenridge, hopefully by Christmas, although we'll see how the liquor licensing goes. It may be January. And then we're also separating the brands, the food and the beer. It's going to be Highside Brewing, and then Colorado Barbecue will be the brand for the food.
Very nice. We'll touch a little bit about why you made that decision a little bit later. Quick introduction for me, if you have not been part of this podcast, I've worked in the financial world for about 15 years. I started with a retail bank, moved into the credit union world about 10 years ago. The last 4 years, I've been involved with OnTap Credit Union, which they hired me to really focus on the craft brewery world and what we call crafting a solution to help achieve their financial goals, which we did with trying to finance the brew house for Axe here. Just so you also know that, and I always like to mention, OnTap can help you with your personal finances. We also partner with and collaborate with merchant service providers, payroll service providers. We have an investment advisor and an insurance broker all available. So OnTap's your one-stop shop. And let's talk about OnTap real quick in the name. We actually started back in 1954 as Coors Credit Union. We started off with a few employees, and employees used to have to purchase their uniform when working for Coors. So our first loans were to allow those employees to go buy their uniform. So that's how we became Beer People Helping Beer People. Now we've continued to grow over the last 68 years and over 20,000 members, 300 million in assets. We keep growing. About 6 years ago, we decided, do a name change so people are a little more familiar with the name, let people know that we're a community credit union. And then we chose the name OnTap to keep the roots of our beer legacy and history. And ever since then, we've been growing like mad, and we're still Beer People helping beer people grow. And Axe is one of our partners that we're help move into the next realm, which going to be his second location. He's going to grow to his third location and working on real estate loans for him. So there's a whole lot going on with Axe, and that's what we can help you with. There's everything we can help you with. But let's get into some questions. You ready? Cheers. Hopefully everybody else. Cheers.
Let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Did you want to talk about these real fast? You want to let
Sure. Just so you guys can drool sitting at home. Hopefully you guys all have your own beers there. But we've got going from my left to right, your right to left, I would guess. We've got our rookie guide, which is what I'm drinking. It's hazy pale ale. I love it. Really citrusy orange juice kind of flavor to it. Citra, Mandarina Bavaria, like a lot of great hops in there. Really crushable, 5.3%. We call it hazy pale. It's almost like IPA in flavor. And then its big brother, the senior guide, is our big hazy pale. Again, all the citrusy hops in there, low bitterness. The trip leader we're really loving now. We changed up the hop profile on this batch, and it's our West Coast style. Our head brewer, should give a shout out to him, Thomas Larson. He's fantastic. He started brewing at Wynkoop way back in the mid 90s under Hickenlooper there, won his first couple of medals at GABF there, and then moved on to Ska and brewed for them for quite a long time. And this is his next one after Modus Operandi. It's his evolution there. And then this guy on the end is our milk stout called Night Skiing. It's a really
one of my favorites.
Smooth one that we're just back in. We've kind of been rotating through all our beers because our current system doesn't allow us to keep up with all the demand. But once we move the facility, we should be able to have all of our mainstays on tap constantly. Which
I know Tom's excited, right? A new brew house, right? Duct tape, which we talk about all the time. You really brewing operations ought to be about how to use duct tape and wire and how to make it work with things you don't have. All right.
Yeah,
So we kind of started talking about it. The first question is, how did you get into craft brewing? How did your passion evolve into your first brewing? It seemed like maybe it was during your graduate, right?
Yeah, I mean, I first brewed my first batch of beer my freshman year in college at CU. I had a baby face. I was 17 years old. I couldn't go to the bars and I couldn't buy anything. So I went down.
So you broke a lot of federal laws.
Yeah.
I'm not just going to make my own alcohol.
Yeah. I went down to Liquor Mart, got a little homebrew kit, it was, and tried, and we're like, okay, how can we make the highest alcohol thing in the world to get us drunk? Because we're college kids. So I started there, did a little bit of homebrewing through college. And at that point that was 90 to 94. So the craft beer revolution was just kicking off in the United States. We had Boulder Beer. We were buying their kegs all the time. Sam Adams, all the other, first starters, and
started working for Walnut Brewery in Boulder in 97, right? Yeah.
That was one of our favorite places to go.
There you go.
Loved the Walnut Brewery, Oasis. I mean, all that stuff way back then.
That's right, Oasis.
Yeah. So fell in love with it there, and then later I went and taught skiing in Germany, which is only going to enhance it. your love of great beer. So I was in Garmisch in Bavaria and just fell in love with it. And, then I came back to the States and the beer had gotten so much better back here. Just the last couple of years I was gone. The craft beer revolution was really kicking off. I just always had a passion for it. And then the business school side of it, like I said, with Kim Jordan and New Belgium, and that ability to, really take everybody's love of craft beer and fold that in with trying to make, your community a better, stronger place.
Nice. That's awesome. Hey, real quick too. So we have another person from Mexico, and I don't know how to say this, but Honey Brew from Mexico, 8,000, Bakersfield. So everybody keep chiming in where you're from. We really appreciate that as we go along. So your passion kicked off. You're ready to, you've been through business school, you have your master's, and you're like, you know what? I have a degree. I can open a business now. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to make beer.
So I did one before that. Actually, my first startup was in Mozambique.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was my.
Are you legally allowed to tell me what you did? We won't have this conversation.
Yeah. No, we were trying to do a carbon credit sustainable development play in Mozambique. I had a South African partner, who was a guy that I met through a old ski buddy in. I met him in Vietnam. He was a conservationist, right. And we put together this business plan, found funding, which was a miracle, and ended up partnering with essentially Mozambique's George Washington.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a revolutionary. yeah, he was interesting. But that was a really fascinating startup, which almost got across the finish line, but not quite. And then I found myself home brewing with a guy who would eventually be my partner, and kind of going, well, what's next?
The hill, right?
Up
the hill. All right, awesome. Yeah. So then, let's kind of talk about that. Then what does the process look like starting with a partner, right? So you met somebody, two people are home brewing, and like, what, we should open a brewery. We should brew to scale now all of a sudden.
Yeah. So partnership is an interesting thing, and starting it and dissolving it are very interesting things. And we talked about it. I had a little bit of a background with organization development too, and that first partnership, there were a lot of trust issues in the beginning. Starting off, and we weren't really getting anywhere, even though we had our funding. So I stepped us back and then did a retreat where we did a visioning session with a guy who was actually former head of engineering at Boeing, who was a colleague. And
you just bump into all these people, like what? Bumped into the CEO, another brewery.
Yeah, it's weird where life takes you
if
you just kind of let it, or make those connections. And that's one thing
so that kind of leads where you're bumping into these people and like put in there like, what were your successes, the good, right? The good, bad, what was the good of during your first brewery of getting started? Sounds financing. That's impressive. Like financing is one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah. And, a lot of it was leap without looking. We had a lot of assumptions which were wrong, but we had a lot of really good relationships that allowed us to get over the hump. And we had a little bit of the money ourselves. Right. So we thought, incorrectly, we said, okay, well, we have enough money individually to finance the system, and we thought that we could get an SBA loan on the rest of it, or get a bank to loan us the money, because at that point, used equipment was selling for more than new, because there was such a backlog, and this was 2012, where so many breweries were looking to open and manufacturing hadn't caught up. So you couldn't get anything used. It was going for more than new. So we figured if we got a new system, then we could leverage that for the financing, which we couldn't. But I had a lot of great relationships from my days teaching skiing, folks that were really wealthy that we ended up bringing in as minority partners into the business, and leveraging that for financing. We looked at SBA route, and that was pretty onerous in terms of the requirements and the paperwork and the timing. And
I'm sure it's like, what's craft beer? Like, what is that?
Yeah, exactly. And it's an interesting thought process, but really a difficult route to go.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are the successes you have with getting it, or the good things that were happening while you're trying to get this open? It sounds like you found funding, you found some people to back you. What about location and people?
Yeah, and I mean, the location I kind of had on lock. I had lived in first brewery I started was in Breckenridge. I'd lived there for 20 years. I knew, the mayor was a friend, and a lot of the folks that worked for the town were friends, and for the county as well, and realtors. So I had a lot of connections within the community, and I had a lot of support from friends that I had taught skiing with, who were strong members of the community. So we had a really good basis for, one, our market, and two, connections to get through the red tape that's sort of inevitable no matter what.
And we talk about that, some of our tips, the 7 tips of being a successful brewery. After talking to many brewery owners, it's make sure you're out in the community even before you open up. It's not about you open and then get in the community. You knew the mayor, but those are some important things that everybody in that community, that you're going to get them to surround you and help back you. Those little pieces can make a difference.
Massively. Sure. I mean, getting through planning, getting through zoning, getting through, building department, everything else, finding out where the best places to locate before you even start negotiating a deal on either real estate or lease are really critical aspects that people don't really take into account. The wastewater is a huge factor too, and how they're going to treat you with that. There's all kinds of hidden costs that can pop up if you don't have those connections and know how you're going to be treated by planning, building, everybody else. Additionally, I mean, you nailed it with knowing that you have the market. We were brewing on a Brew Magic for all of our test batches, and so we did these warehouse parties where we didn't sell the beer, but we invited all our friends and had tasting parties. And, from the organization development side, it's people support what they help to create. So,
absolutely.
I invited all my friends, the word got out. We had these great little parties. We put paper up on the wall, got feedback from everybody, but really we were only looking at what people drank.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they would tell you this, that, and the other thing as to what the beers were, but it was really about what they consumed. And
huge difference. We talk about all the time with the breweries that, you as a brewery owner, you want to craft the style you like, right? You think it's so important, but ultimately you need to brew something that somebody's going to buy and drink, right? That's going to be your money maker, right? Yeah. That's really important. So, I mean, those aspects make a whole lot of sense. So it seems like a lot of breweries, just some comments, work at a brewery domestically or internationally before starting up. A requirement for success. How do you feel about that? I mean, I know my opinion just from dealing with brewery owners, but do you really feel like it's important that you work for another brewery before starting one?
I didn't. I'm not sure how pertinent it is. I think you definitely have to know how to brew. If you're coming at it just from the business side, I think it's really important that you know that, and know what equipment you need, what you don't, in terms of your initial capital raises, how you can do things and create great beer without going for the $500,000 system, to start out.
So how did you make those adjustments then? So if you were just running on the homebrew system, then how did you make that choice or those adjustments? Is it just trial and error? Is that some of the good, the bad, and the ugly was, we just kept trying and trying?
Not really, no. We had a friend who had started up another brewery, who was part of our little home brew group, and he had worked. Give a shout out to Dry Dock, and he had worked down there when he had worked at the Brew Hut, and then it became Dry Dock, and he was one of the first brewers there. And then Bill over at Bierstadt was there in the beginning, and so we had great coaches and we had great support from the commercial brew community, and that's one of the best things about craft beer is the collaborations and the
tight-knit community.
Yeah, and everybody, the ethos was basically like, if one person's making bad beer, it's going to tank us all.
Right.
So everybody was really, really helpful in terms of making sure that we had what we needed to succeed. And if we're open to just asking questions and not thinking that it's about our egos and, we know what we're doing better than anybody else. If you're open to that, then all the answers are there within the craft community. So
on the financial side, so, when we cover that question, I've always suggested to anyone who's never brewed to scale that, have you talked with other breweries? And back in the time when you started, you probably could talk to a brewer and they would invite you in to come brew, right?
Yeah.
Help on brew day. We did that at the Walnut Brewery. Robbie Taylor would invite somebody to come in, So I think that's important in knowing that piece. So ultimately, whether you work for a brewery, it's make sure that you're engulfed in this community, that you can get that advice, you can get that information, because your recipes, everything changes as you go to scale. And if you start with a 3-barrel system and you move to a 10-barrel system, things are going to change. You need to know how to make those adjustments. So I don't think it's a requirement for success, but I think it's important that you're engulfed in that world. They're going to help you do, or at least teach you some things that you shouldn't have done. And we'll get into that, where someone was help coaching Axe and he didn't fully understand it until he made the mistake. You're like, oh, now I know what he means, but we'll kind of get into that. Really cool.
Yeah. And I'll give a shout out to Robert, who's on here with us, Robert Deal. He was also one of those that helped us a lot on the technical side. He was teaching a homebrew course at Colorado Mountain College when we started up, and was always there to collaborate and contribute. And really appreciated your help, Robert. And he said, isn't the business side the biggest challenge?
Yeah.
Well,
that's
it is. That's absolutely
the
right.
ugly. You can't say that's the ugly side.
Yeah.
No, but I think, if you can't do apprenticeship, if you can do anything to get engulfed in it, no matter what you do, I'm going through. So let's kind of talk about some of the hurdles. We're going to go to the bad side of this kind of podcast, to getting open. Lease, money, license, which money. You're the only person I've ever heard go, oh, we had the money already. God, just ignore what he said.
Well, we didn't have the money. We thought we did. I literally, actually, I mean, the ugly side is funny because we did a little thing on New Belgium. Paul, our professor, did like this little case study at business school. And he said, well, New Belgium started on $50,000 of credit card debt out of their garage.
Right.
And they said, don't do that. Well, we tripled down on that. I put 150 grand on my cards to start off,
so
thinking that we could get that loan.
You shouldn't, but why did they tell you not to do that?
Well, I mean, they say not to do that because you never know how it's going to go. You have your projections, but if somebody else isn't willing to back you, then your projections are probably just in your head. And it's good to have support, especially from people that can bring more support to you in other ways and things that you don't know. I mean, the positive part of that is we ended up paying off. I had 24-month zero interest on those cards that I put that money on, and we ended up paying it all off before we paid a cent in interest.
So that makes sense. So we just have it. So in a previous podcast, we talked about a credit card is short-term lending tool. So in the short term, you don't use it for long term. So to Axe's point, you do 24 months, 0% financing. Perfect. You did it exactly. And some of the reasons is that you want to make sure you have money, right? You want to make sure you have cash. I get it if you're gonna, if you're safety net. So there's other reasons for it. So so licenses, any cease and desist. What are some of the other bad things? As he chuckles.
Man, I mean, there's so much that you learned on the fly, and I mean, again, this is one of the things the guys in the entrepreneurship class. They basically, I ended up TAing for them, being a teaching assistant the year after, because they wanted somebody who could keep up with them skiing. One was an old ski racer. The other guy was a ski patroller. So they're like, yeah, we chose you because we don't really need a TA. They're forcing us to. We just wanted somebody who could, it's like a golfing fourth. But I learned tremendously more just hanging out with those guys for another year. But sorry, I got distracted.
We were talking about the good, the bad.
And the ugly side of it.
Just the bad side, not the ugly. We're just the bad side. So, getting that financing, any type of warning, your professors were like, in lectures, like, hey, look out for this. Yeah, we kind of joked, you're telling me, don't step in the dog poop, and what do you do?
No, you were talking about the financing side too. And, it's not that it wasn't an issue, the finance side of it, but it was leap and have faith, which, it worked out, but it's probably not the way to do it. And so, it's definitely not the way to do it. But they also had a thing where if you weren't willing to jump in and take that risk, well, probably nobody's going to follow you. Right. So, that was part of it for us in the beginning, was just jumping, taking the leap of faith and having faith in ourselves.
So is that the bad or the good or a little bit of both?
It's both. Yeah. I mean, it could have gone horribly wrong. As I found out starting the second brewery when I thought I had all my ducks in a row and then had to go scrambling. But yeah, it's always a ride, and you have to be willing to take some of that risk and have people come along with you, or or not.
What about licensing, the leases, and cease and desist from each other? So you run into
cease and desist. There's a funny story from the very beginning. We decided we weren't going to name our beers in the beginning because we didn't want to run into cease and desist, and we had.
Well, we should touch bases. So cease and desist. So what is a cease and desist?
Cease and desist is a legal letter saying, "Hey, you're trampling on our trademark, and we're going to sue you for this if you don't stop."
Right.
Usually that's where it's going to end because the cost of enforcing anything legally is way too expensive. So that's generally where that ends. We got one of those. Actually, it was our first day of our first year at GABF, and it came from Sam at Dogfish Head. And I get an email in my inbox that's from Sam, and I'm one of my beer heroes.
Yeah.
And the title is Collaboration. And I'm like, there's no way. Hey, we're really successful a few months in, but I'm sure Dogfish Head doesn't want to collaborate with us. And I open the thing, and sure enough, it's a thing saying, "Hey, this is a collaborative business. All of this, by the way, we own the trademark. We had a India brown ale. They have Indian brown ale as one of their main stays. And we thought we were good. I wrote back to him and said, "Hey, thanks for your concern. We're just doing style types. Love your beer. Have a great day." Next email I got back from him was on my birthday. And said, "Hey, we've defended this name. We'll do it again. Pay us this much per case or change the name." So we changed the name.
And I will say the cease and desist, I fully understand him. And everybody, to Sam's defense is he's doing what he's supposed to do, and you should do everything.
Yeah, he's protecting his
brand. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the good thing about the collaboration. And so many breweries I know, and I always talk about names. Like you name your brewery or you name a beer, make sure you do all kinds of research. I know someone who had to change their name of their brewery shortly before they open their doors. Yep. I mean, so it happens. So those things are kind of important.
Or even after, like our buddy Tim down at Strange Craft had to change it from Strange Brew to Strange Craft
that's
Brewing.
Funny. So we'll touch on that question about your thoughts on prioritizing direct sales over the bar. But okay, so you little cease and desist. What about licensing? What about those pieces that you kind of get into trying to get the brewery open? The TTB license, all of that, those processes, those can be bad because timing, right? They say 60 days and it turns out to be 90 days, or they turn out.
Yeah, we just had the one in Fairplay where 5 years ago, when we started in Frisco, it took them TTB and state less than 6 weeks licensing. I mean, we were just snap our fingers, it was done. The first brewery, when we started that, there were so many applications that it was almost an 8-month process with TTB.
This is before COVID.
Right. And then this one that we just did, the one in Fairplay, this wasn't the manufacturing, this is just a wholesale and a sales room license. That took almost 3 months through the state, and they've just slowed way down. So, I mean, there's the state licensing, there's the federal licensing, internationally, I don't know how it looks. It's very different, I'm sure. But we have that two layers of licensing, and then additionally you have all the township licensing that you need to get, business licenses. You need
local meetings involved with it.
I mean, town council meetings, planning meetings, depending on the zoning, trying to get your town council on board. Sanitation can be really tricky and onerous in terms of fees wherever you are. I mean, Breckenridge specifically, we just fought a near year-long battle, which wasn't really a battle, it was just a process. But it took a year from the time where we agreed on a lease term with our landlord to do a change of use for his property in the town of Breckenridge. And we're going to end up spending $220,000 between us and the landlord. We worked out a deal there where he's spending most of it, but because it stays with his property, not the business. But we're paying for parking, water tap fees, and sewer fees called PIFs, plant improvement fees. So there's all these hidden things that could be anywhere down the line, aside from just the basic liquor licensing. There's a myriad of things that you have to navigate.
and be ready. We talk about having the financing, having the capital or the cash on hand because you think you're going to open one day, right? And then that delays an opening. Well, then there's still all the pieces as you're moving along. We on tap partner with Metropolitan State University with their brewery degree, and we've been a couple lectures now. Tony's actually there giving a lecture today, but the professor for it, Bernardo, brought up a good point. The fun part's the brewing.
Yeah.
Right?
That's the easy part.
Right?
Yeah.
Then there's all these other pieces why on tap is getting involved. It's that financing. It's right. It's why we talk about, brought you in is, brewing the beer is great, right? Well, man, I didn't think about, I needed a license. I didn't think about any type of improvements I had to do on my building, right? I don't know if you get, you asked tag on something.
Yeah, you asked about the landlord thing. We actually almost got red tagged a couple of times in that beginning. And then
red tag is when an inspector comes in and says
you're closed.
Yep, you're closed. Yeah. You can't go any farther.
Yeah, and and that's if you're doing work without a permit or they haven't signed off on it. Right. It could be anything that they do, and they can just walk in and shut you down. So reaching out beforehand would be my best advice, and really knowing your building officials, knowing the folks at the sanitation district, and making sure you really develop those relationships is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of money.
That's what we talk about, getting involved in the community. And it's really not just the people who are going to come in and drink your beer, which the employees will too of the city, but really understanding that whole process and asking and talking to owners, brewery owners, any business owner, if they've opened, what are some of the hurdles that they've gone through. Okay.
Yeah. The town of Breckenridge over COVID passed this ordinance that if you change from retail to quote unquote restaurant, even though we were just a tap room, they put in a requirement that you provide affordable housing. Oh, and that's a real non-starter. And it turned out, to your point about relationships, when we got in front of the planning commission, I had a couple friends that were on the planning commission, and we put forth the evidence that said, hey, we're not going to have more employees than the previous, so you shouldn't throw this on us. And that was part of the ordinance, was it said, if you can provide evidence, we'll let you go. And the guys on the planning commission, a couple of them were real skeptical of all the evidence. I had a bunch of other brewery owners who signed letters saying what they needed to operate a tap.
I remember, didn't they say that you're going to have 15 employees?
Yeah,
right.
For 1,000 square feet, 15 employees. Yeah,
you wish.
I was like, I'm going to go out of business. Yeah, like there's no way I can support 15 people.
Have you been to a brewery?
Yeah.
Where would you put
15. So one per tap.
Yeah.
That's how we're going to do this. But yeah, I had friends on the planning commission who were like, hey, we know Axe. We know the information he's giving us is real, and he's a good member of the community. He supports this and this, and he's not bullshitting us. He cares about this stuff too. So
yeah, and that's a point again, building that relationship you talk about. Even in my business, building a relationship with brewery owners, but building a relationship in that town and knowing that those people can help you with those ordinances and finding out how you follow the rules, enabled by following the rules, or maybe updating the council of, look, we're a tap house. We're not going to have 15 employees. We're not what a normal retail business would be, what those guidelines are, but knowing those pieces are really important and understanding how to fight those battles. I mean, you've got to be able to fight for what you think is right and having that information in your back pocket. Okay. Yeah. So we'll kind of we're going to go to the ugly side of it. The ugly side of it in the conversation, then we'll leave room for questions too at the end. The ugly side of it when we talk about it is there's a lot of different things that can happen opening a business. And I stress to people on different committees, and we're talking to different potential brewery owners, is making sure what you're going to do. And an operating agreement is one of the biggest ones that I talk about. It's not just about being successful. It's about, well, what do you want to do if the business ends or the partnership dissolves or people want to try other things. And I'm kind of leading into it, but it's kind of where in the experience with Axe is, kind of the ugly side of it, and it's the legal side of it. So you can also go to the legal side of it is if you have to fight for your building, right? You need to get attorneys involved with it because somebody says you can't do something. So kind of talk about some of the ugly side of this that people just don't really see and really owning any business.
Yeah. So partnerships, I think is where you're leading there. When you're getting into a business, it's obviously really important to have an operating agreement, have things in place beforehand where you at least have the conversations as to, what's going to happen if one or the other dies.
Right.
If you're both partners or, does this pass on to a spouse or whatever? And having a really good lawyer to help you through that is essential.
Yeah, and actually, I know a brewery that's in Colorado. It's been going on for about a year now. Same thing happened.
Yeah.
When the owner passes away, what happens to the ownership piece of it?
Yeah, and and having that operating agreement in place is great, and it gives a legal basis and guideline to follow, which may or may not be relevant at the end of the day. Because if you're in business with somebody who refuses to follow that and has enough money to fight you, you can end up completely losing everything if they have enough leverage and money to go against that operating agreement. So, I think having that relationship in place would be the advice that I'd have. But then again, those relationships can dissolve and devolve, and your initial dreams and interests can differ, and especially in a business where there's alcohol involved, that can that can go a lot of different ways. Whether you're successful or not successful, people can do all kinds of things, and then you're really in a partnership, essentially getting married to that person. And your operating agreement acts kind of like a prenup, and it does govern that. But anybody who's been through a divorce knows that having that prenup is only part of it. Then you're still going to be fighting in the courts, and that process is costly, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money. And I was never going to sell out of my first brewery, and I ended up working for 2 years trying to make that partnership work. We were in that for 4.5 years, and that partnership was not working on a functional day-to-day basis. And spent 2 years setting meetings, trying to collaborate and get to the same place with my former partner. Didn't work. We had a mediation clause in the operating agreement, and we went to mediation. Thought I was going to buy him out. I had put all the work into it. It was my community, the place that I lived, and all my relationships. And then became apparent through the mediation that he was not willing to sell at any price.
Right.
So then it was a matter of, okay, I had a really good lawyer who was a buddy from undergrad, who convinced me to take
taking notes, right? Just everybody meet in college, keep their name in your back pocket.
Yeah, and those are relationships too. Like, you've been through it with them,
right?
You've been through war with these people in one way or the other. I mean, my lawyer's wife is a really good friend of mine. We were all really good friends. Watched them go through all kinds of things with their kids, and so you have a really good, trusted relationship there where you've been through stuff together. And that might be a good piece of advice too. Is if you're going into business with somebody in a partnership, maybe have gone through some battles with them first, and know how they're going to react in stressful situations, not just in dreaming and good times.
And that could be too. It's all growth. We've seen it where growth in two partners, two different visions, two different ideas. Family things happen; they have to go a different direction. And and I say this all the time in every presentation. And now I'm going to work it into this one: is you need 3 people, right? You need an attorney, a banker, and an accountant. And all of us are going to help you do something different, but we're there to help your business grow. And we may not kind of agree. A banker and an accountant may not always agree, because accountant wants to save you money, not pay taxes. I want you to show income so I can lend you money. The attorney piece of it, and people always think, I don't need an attorney until I need an attorney. And that's not necessarily true. You probably need an attorney before you need an attorney. Same as we said about with a banker. You need a banker before you need a banker. We're going to guide you through the process of how to make those decisions. So, absolutely. Yeah. And I think let's talk a little about, arbitration, the benefits of a mediator. Mediator compared to going to court.
Yeah, and so we had a mediation and arbitration clause in our operating agreement. The mediation clause got us to the table, got a contract signed where he, agreed to buy me out, and theoretically that should have been the end of it. But then he refused to pay.
Things happen.
And
things happen.
That happens. Here we are 4 years later, and I'm still collecting. So arbitration and court would be the thing there. And interesting. I mean, my buddy who's the attorney is like, well, you now have a almost a degree in law at this point.
Oh,
Having
yeah.
gone through 4 years of this stuff and understanding all the different maneuvering that lawyers can do to drag things out, and you really start to understand the time value of money at that point.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is where Michael and I first met.
That's right.
Talking about, hey, how do I get money right now?
I was like, this is not resolved. I can't help you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, okay, well,
Yeah.
looks like it's gonna be private financing. Then. But yeah, that arbitration piece costs you about $250,000 to go all the way through to the end. 95% of arbitration cases settle. Ours didn't, went all the way through the end.
Yeah.
Because the goal on the other side was to attempt to bankrupt me. And so if they could drag it out as long as they possibly could, that would have been the best thing. Having that arbitration clause was really good because going to arbitration, there's no appeals. So once you go through that process, even though it's super costly and it takes a long time, there's no appeal to the court. Whereas if the court rules on something, there's all kinds of appeals. So that could have gone on for a decade, where ours went on for I think it was 3 years from the mediation arbitration. And then, now it's the collections part of that, which is still dragging on. But
so, it definitely can. I mean, the legal piece of it, which is really the ugly side of this, is that, once you get to the legal side of it, and everybody wants to fight for their portion of it or what they believe in. And, that really becomes the biggest issue is, everybody wants to be successful and try to separate it. And I think really, for me, the point of the ugly is, you just need to do everything you possibly can to make sure you have your ducks in a row, which you did, which if you didn't, it could have been longer, more costly, or, if you don't have an operating agreement, it could be, I'm assuming a judge would have to come up with a decision and go, look, this is what we're going to decide. And, someone may want to keep the business going, and maybe the judge going, you're going to dissolve, we talk about the divorce, and been through a divorce myself, and I believe you.
I know,
right? Yeah.
That was way easier than the business divorce. Yeah, for me.
So that's the same for me. So is it really a judge could say, you're going to sell, everything you worked hard for. So, a lot of this is, be prepared, be ready. It's impossible, but again, it's not always the ugly side of it, meaning that it's a bad reason to separate. Sometimes it's a good reason. I took a picture of this. Make sure we had them. Is that, if you want to try to do different things, and I know I've had some brewery owners decide, we've been in the brewery, we want out, then they want to keep going. So you definitely want to protect yourself. So, there's all phases of this. And I kind of joked in the beginning, we're going to scare you out of starting a brewery. And that's not true. It's that it's just things can happen, as people know. But
and the more you know, the better off you are.
Sure. I'm gonna look at a couple of these questions before I ask you mine. It says, can you share your thoughts on prioritizing direct sales over the bar, a select few keg customers, self-distributing, and how did your choices work during COVID? Ooh, good question.
Yeah.
Good question.
Yeah, Robert. So
is that Robert?
Yeah, that's Robert. Yeah, he
did you
knows me well.
Questions
I did not.
I need you to ask me these questions.
Yeah, no. Initially, and still, over the bar sales are where the money's at for breweries.
Best margin.
Yeah. You're looking at getting $6 to $8 a pint versus $1.25 or so on distribution, right, if you're lucky. And then you're also talking about a lot more capital expense, a lot more labor, a lot more moving pieces and parts to do distribution than to do over the bar, which is where our locations really help us out. Big tourist destinations.
Oh yeah,
everybody coming in, everybody wanting to try something local. In terms of distribution, we sort of looked at keg accounts as really marketing, kind of paid marketing. And through COVID, that's the interesting thing is, that really backfired, especially being in tourist locations. Luckily there was all the PPP money and everything else to keep us going at that point, because our landlords were certainly not going to let us out of the rent and the lease, right, and all of that. So we had ongoing costs with very, very little sales. We ended up taking some of that money and buying the canner that you see making these beers here, which was a Gosling from Wild Goose, and it was sufficient to get kind of the beer that we had in the tanks at that point into cans. And
I cover that with breweries. We're talking about it. If you have it ready to serve and someone can't come in your door, I get that's when the margin isn't as important as you need to make something, right?
Yeah.
Right? Absolutely.
Yeah, so we hedged it with that canner, and limited success with that, but that wasn't our goal, and
Right.
things opened up quick enough that we were okay. But a lot of friends who had really spent a lot of money on distribution. Some of it paid off, some of it didn't.
Yeah, I've heard both sides. Yep.
Yeah,
Some people it just took off like crazy, and others it just didn't.
Yeah,
It was a hard market.
Yeah, I mean, and especially in Colorado. I mean, we're saturated in
shelf space.
Yeah, and you got to be on your game marketing wise, and really tight on your operations to be able to turn a profit. And I think about 5,000 barrels is what people generally say is the break even on distribution.
Oh wow!
Where depending on your overhead, your lease, hopefully you're in a position where you can own the land under your feet.
Right.
That's the ideal. Especially with the capital investments you're going to make. I mean, you talk about landlords. Our initial one at the brewery in Breckenridge, that guy scared the shit out of us after we got open. We were so popular that parking was a big issue, and he, hadn't really bothered us. And he comes in, he goes, "Well, can't do anything about the parking. I'm going to shut you down. You're violating your lease."
Oh,
and that was terrifying. So that immediately sent us looking towards buying real estate,
right?
So we would never have that threat. But landlords essentially are another partner that you have that you didn't ask for, and that's
we talk about the ugly, right?
Yeah.
Attorney, like make sure you understand what triple that is. Right?
Mm-hmm.
The parking, like, would you really pay attention to that in the lease? Right? Why would I look at okay, parking, whatever?
Yeah, yeah. We never thought about that in the lease, and then we got a landlord. We're doing great. We're paying off all our debt, and he's like, "Yeah, all right. You either figure this out, or you're out of here." And that was terrifying, knowing his reputation.
Oh, that's gotta be scary for sure. Let's see. Well, I'm going to share real fast. We talked about the keg piece of it in marketing. I do know some of the scary thing about it is when you provide another tap room with your keg, you're at their mercy on how their bartender wants to pour your beer and serve your beer. I mean, the part of the craft is you want to make sure that somebody understands your beer, can explain your beer, not just pour it, set it on the bar top for the customer to grab or the server to bring to a table. So that's a little scary thing I know when it comes to kegs.
Absolutely.
How big was your initial Highside brew house, and how did you make a decision on brewing size?
So
size matters.
Yeah, size matters. I mean, the more interesting thing was the first brewery, and that was talking to our friends who had gotten into it. One of our friends, the one that I was talking about in the beginning, started with a 7-barrel system, and they were brewing 3 shifts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so 24-hour brew cycles. And he told us go as big as you can afford to. And so we ended up with a 10-barrel.
That thought process.
Yeah, we ended up with a 10-barrel, which we thought was a big stretch. We were wrong. We had 10-barrel with 4 20-barrel fermenters, and pretty quickly we were double batching everything to keep up. And then we kegged everything off. We didn't have brights, so we saved some capital there. But then, we had more labor on our side to keg everything off. So you make your choices there as to where you want to spend your capital. But yeah, we decided the 10-barrel. The 10-barrel, I think, is a good starting size, and I kind of
I mean, it used to be a 10-barrel. Oh, that's a big system, right?
Yeah.
We were in 3-barrel systems, like, wow, a 10-barrel. Now it's like, I need a 15.
Yeah, and I always tell people I wouldn't go under a 10 because you can't afford to make enough beer to finance the next system if you're going to upgrade it. Maybe on a 7 you could, but it's going to be a lot of labor. So I kind of recommend a 10 as the minimum. At Highside, we bought out Backcountry Brewery, and they had a 15-barrel system already in there and 4 30-barrel fermenters. And then we have 8 bright tanks, and that's currently what we're on. Our new system, we're sticking with a 15-barrel system, and we'll have those 4 30s and 4 15-barrel ferms, and then a bunch of brights and huge amount of cooler space. That's the other thing that people kind of don't look at is your cold storage space is really a lot of times your bottleneck. So everybody's looking at, fermentation and brew house size and all that. And while size does matter.
We're talking about 16
It's
ounce
certainly how
cans.
you use it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I've heard that, when I had conversations with people about being able to afford a brew house, sometimes it's all you can afford.
Yeah.
So my biggest advice has always been, you just need to start making beer. Like the most important thing is you need to start brewing beer and sell it over the bar top as we're sitting at the bar top, because you need to start bringing in revenue, right? And I know they'll talk about their production. They're going to do self-distribution or get into the distribution game. And I'm like, how much you go to the bar top? Because that's really where your income is going to come through. So it's definitely a catch-22. And great point about, really thought about it. Are you going to be able to brew enough beer to move to the next brew system? It definitely challenges. And some people, I know I've had some breweries that they're just set on the 10 barrel system, use an example, but they only can afford a 3 barrel. And again, I'm always like, at the end of the day, if you can make money and show you make money, then we can help you finance the next brew house, right? So that point is whether you can brew enough beer to finance it, self-finance it, or can we find a way to get you the money? What's that?
Just looking at that last one, from real estate to equipment loans to lawyers, friends, connections, great reminders. I was going to say one thing that kind of reminds me of a point that I was saying to Michael before we started. My professor Paul, he was fantastic. He always said things to me that like 2 years later I actually learned. He's way smarter than me, but he, I was looking to raise money. I thought he might be a source, but
he's like, no way am I going to invest in a brewery.
Yeah, two things on that. One was just kind of a flippant statement, and he goes, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money.
Nice, that's true.
And that really does work. If you are just looking to hone your skills, ask for people for money, because then they get their cackles up and they want to tell you everything. And you'll get a lot of good advice if you listen, some bad, but some good.
Take it all, right?
Yeah.
Listen to everything. We were talking before is that, we joke that 2 years later, after that same professor gave you some advice, you were like, oh.
Yeah, I was that way because we had the first people that we got commitments for money. I had a sort of spidey sense that they might be a problem. But the other piece that Paul said was, you don't raise money, you hire money.
Right.
So he said, vet them like you would an employee. And plenty of people in the world have money, and you can get money a lot of different places, but what do they add to the equation?
Yeah.
How are they going to help you? Because if they're not going to help you, they're probably going to be a hindrance, and they're probably going to take extra time away from your focus, your vision, and that's going to take everything you got concentrated on
absolutely
creating what you're trying to birth.
And I put my sense into it. The good thing is find investors, right? And then you might have to give up some equity. That could be the bad piece of it. The ugly piece is this: if you give up too much equity, you can lose control of your business. Two, if you give up too much ownership, the ugly part is if they're 20% or greater, it's a standard. 20% or greater, a financial institution such as on tap, we want to see their financials, and I always make it silent partner, and they're 21% or 20% or greater. No such thing as silent. We've had deals where we could not get it done because that partner, rightfully so, they wanted to buy into it. They have that ownership piece of it. It's their money, but they didn't want to provide financials, and you kind of get stuck. So that's something to think of. I talked before. You get in partnership. A partnership is your investors are partners with you, right? Your owners are partners with you, no matter what percentage they are. So just be careful about when you start going down that road.
Yeah, and then the first brewery was friends and family kind of stuff, and people who had an emotional stake in the brewery, but really no knowledge of business.
Right.
And they really got in the way because their egos were at stake, and they took a lot of time and energy away from the business. And in this particular venture, I've got, 2 partners. My folks are very, very small partners.
Yeah.
And then I've got another partner who is a bond trader and a financial wizard. And he has been nothing but gold in terms of patience, advice, shoulder to cry on here and there, and a great guy to golf and raise a glass with.
Yeah.
And then I've got a restaurant partner as well who has 40 years in the business and also doesn't have enough skin in the game to really care which way it goes. So he's not, and he has the patience to understand how the business goes after 40 years in it. And, you know, not sort of freak out when you have a bad quarter.
You can't. I mean, so, you know, I use that kind of philosophy that pops in my head when I was on the banking side of it. I had a Series 6. We talk about investing with people. And I say this all the time. If you can't sleep, if you decide to make this, if you can't sleep, it's the wrong investment for you. Like, you've got to be able to
That's
sleep,
really good advice.
right? Yeah. If it goes, if you're not, and we've had to sell out of investments within a short period of time. Sometimes it's been as short as 3 days because they just can't settle with it. So sometimes it's also to think about is someone's going to invest in your business for being an owner. Do they really have the savvy, the knowledge to understand that this is a marathon, right? It's not a race. And if you're in for a race, you need to understand if I'm going to invest in Highside, then as an investor, you need to make sure it's mapped out. Listen, if you want out in a year, right, what are the consequences of trying to get out? That goes back to the attorney piece of it. I haven't heard about social media presence. How do you believe it separates you and the crowd? Interesting example because the food side of it. Summit County is a good example with lots of brewery choices. Any comments on the importance of brewery names, origin stories, dedicated social media? Oh yeah. So I'm going to chime in real fast, and I bring that in the 7 tips. Is that social media presence is so important. And I've teased Axe about it one time when I was so Fairplay, all of a sudden he sends me an email for the grand opening. I think it was 3 days before. Hey, they said we can open, we're opening. I'm like, wait, what? Okay, I'll be up there. But joking on his website, because we were pushing the social media out, is that you if it's not set and ready to go, like people may not go back to it. That's huge. Being part of the community events, I think, is really important. Mm-hmm. And what I have heard from brewery owners is, especially community events and festivals, is in the beginning, they do too many. They didn't think about their strategy of really where they wanted to go. They just kept going out everywhere, and maybe that wasn't their market or their area. Yeah. So that's one thing I can share from brewery owners. And so how about you? And I mean, I think it's good to touch on the social media about the reason you're separating the name.
So we're changing from Highside Brewing and Barbecue to Highside Brewing and Colorado Barbecue as 2 separate entities. And one of the things that I learned from the first brewery, which had no food in this one, is you get beat up on both sides when you're brew pub. And if you can have a distinct...
That's the social media where they go on and give you reviews. That's why the social media.
Yeah, the social media side of it. So, you know, it's funny. You'll have somebody, it's just like somebody coming in and saying, you know, 1 star for your chili beer because... You know, this was a great chili beer, but I hate chili beers.
Yeah. It was hot.
Yeah. It was spicy.
Yeah.
Like, it's a chili beer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, social media is a pain in the ass no matter what you do with it. And you're going to have that kind of crap that you can't control at all. But if you separate the two, what we've found is that people come in straight for the barbecue, don't care about the beer. And they're like, I just wanted a Coors Light with my barbecue and I had to have this, you know, craft beer and it wasn't what I
had this delicious craft beer while I ate my barbecue.
Yeah, so Highside Brewing gets 2 stars because you didn't have a Coors Light. Like, well, okay. And then on the flip side, you know, like, okay, we came in for the beers. We love the beers, but we didn't want barbecue. So now you get 3 stars or whatever. Right. So separating the two, then people can rate them solely on their own merits. And that's one of the things that we're doing there. Standing out in a crowd has become exponentially more difficult than when I started the first brewery. I mean, I think we had 5,000 followers before we opened our doors. We still don't, I believe, have 5,000 on Facebook, but that's not where anybody goes anymore for their stuff. So, you know, my best advice there is find somebody young and hire them and pay them to do it, and don't navel gaze on your own business. You know, staring at the reviews is just.
Oh my God, can you make a shirt that's a beer that says that?
Yeah.
Nasal gaze.
Navel gazer. Yeah, navel gazer IPA. There we go. Don't steal it.
But so that social media, you're 100% right. Find someone who's active in social media, because to your point, you know, the joke is Facebook is for the older crowd.
Yeah.
That's us, right?
Yeah.
Is that, you know, TikTok is the newest thing. And that's it. It moves so fast now.
Mm-hmm.
You're 100% right. In social media, you think you're doing it right, but everybody moved off to this other one. And I think it was probably been 5 or 6 years ago, they had the commercial where people were on an elevator with their phone and they're like, hey, are you on this new whatever platform? It's the best. And so someone jumps on the elevator and they're on, they go, oh, my grandparents are on that one now.
Yeah.
Like it just
Change it.
moves, it moves so fast. So, but I think it's important, and we stress, so we talk about, when you're looking to open a brewery and you're thinking about how much money you need, we're talking about buying equipment and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then we tell you need to go pay for a marketing person. They're like, I can't afford that.
Mm-hmm.
Some ways can you afford not to?
Right.
And there's ways to try to figure out people, to get involved with it, but you absolutely should. And it's a tighter market now.
Well, and it really depends too. Like there's a brewery down the road from us, Outer Range, that I'm sure you guys are familiar with if you like hazies. And they spent a fortune on marketing.
Yeah.
And when they started off, that really, really worked for them. I mean, the first brewery, I did it all myself.
Right.
And yeah, that took a lot of time and energy away from the core of running the business, training people, doing everything else that I could have been doing otherwise. But it's also about your business model. I mean, how far do you actually need to reach? Is your location good enough that people are going to come in anyway? And is that going to meet your margins? So I think it's something that you have to determine as to whether it's worth it based on your projections, your pro forma, your business goals, all of that kind of stuff. And those are really hard things to determine, but a lot of it's gut, some of it market analysis, some of it really knowing where you are, I think is critical. I mean, that startup in Africa, I didn't really think it was going to work because it's Africa. I'm not African, like my partner was South African, but he wasn't Mozambican.
Right.
And he had connections at the top level of government, but that's not being connected to the community, boots on the ground. And I think that's a huge, huge factor in their success.
I think it's really talking about the festivals that I'm talking to breweries. They did all of them. They're all over. But some of it is you're stretching your resources thin. You only have X number of employees and X number of dollars to spend. So, that the good thing is you should go in the marketing. The bad thing is you don't know really where to go. And the ugly is you spent too much money. So it's finding that balance, right? But you have to try, right? And a lot of it is, it still goes back to where we talk about is knowing your financials. And I'll tell you, dealing with Axe through with the loan of the equipment and hopefully the financing the commercial real estate is he's very good about his financials. And if you don't know your financials, then again, you need to hire somebody that's going to help you with your financials. I mean, that piece of it is so important. Can we go back to where the fun part's brewing the beer, right? You have to know where all your money is going on it.
Yeah, and don't be scared of the numbers either. I mean, I didn't really know much about it before I did my MBA. And well, I mean, I did have a pretty good education from my dad, at least on higher finance, and kind of grew up with some good people around me, but I didn't know much. I was a ski instructor, a raft guide, driving a 20-year-old beat up Subaru, and
that makes sense. Absolutely. Those cross right into financing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Three locations.
No accountant, no tax expert, but again, it comes down to asking people and asking for advice and listening. And then, working with people like Michael, who, I had a buddy who now has started a brewery because their numbers were so good. Who was our banker to start off, and
took him out of the market. So it's
and I spent endless hours with him, really learning what the bank was looking for. I spent endless hours with my accountant, talking to my accountant about how do we deal with financing and taxes and balance those two equations. And I remember back from the beginning of my finance classes and professor saying cash flow is king. Just learn your statement of cash flows and figure that out, and the rest will fall into place.
So I'm going to grab this conversation, Tony. So we took this Q's class, and it talks about that, being able to break down the financials even more on our side and ratios. And they have a saying that says, if the cash don't go, the loan don't go. That's that cash flow piece of it is, we have to show the ability to repay. It protects not only you as a borrower, but it also protects the credit union and the members. But that's so important in the statement of cash flow, a whole nother subject, but knowing those pieces of it. But something you said I think is very important, and it may be hard for people to do, is it's okay if you're great at brewing beer but not good on the financials to ask for help, ask for advice. There's nothing wrong with that. I feel like we're playing the shuffle game. Wait, that one was mine. So I think it is. I mean, I stress it all the time. When you come to somebody and you need the help, it may be too late.
Yeah.
It's really trying to figure out what to do before you're in that situation. But lastly is if you need help, please ask somebody. Because the other thing we can do is, even as financial side, is try to put you in a better position so you can survive. I mean, really a lot of times this is what you need to do, and digging into your finances, man, that's a whole nother subject we can go into. How important do you feel that brewery owners should place on food? My partner is the existing restaurant owner, but that seems rare. In my area, many breweries rely on food trucks.
Yeah.
What are you feeling? And I don't.
Food
I'm
truck
a fan
all
of
the
food
way.
trucks.
Yeah.
I was going to say I'm not
Yeah.
a fan of a food truck, except I love food trucks.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of food trucks concept, except for the way you do it in Fairplay.
Okay.
That is
Interesting.
That is, if you're going to do it, plan it on your property.
Yeah.
You never have to worry about it driving in weather.
Yeah.
You have to worry about it breaking down.
I mean, it's funny, that first brewery, we didn't have a food truck. We didn't have food options. We tried to partner with like pizza delivery people, that kind of thing. Failed epically. But we also had a really small tap room. So our ideal guest came in and had 2 beers, got a growler and a t-shirt, and left. And, what was interesting was one summer we did have a food truck, and it was the one summer that our sales weren't growing. It flatlined that summer because what happened was people stayed longer and they took up space. Other people who wanted to come in had nowhere to go, and we ended up losing because we just wanted some more beer, and the seats were always full because people stayed too long. Now, where we are in Frisco, we have a ton of space, so stay as long as you want, and the food will help with that. It will help people be able to drink more beer, all that kind of thing. So I think it's really situationally dependent. We are moving. I mean, part of what we're doing actually is moving to a food truck model, both in Frisco and in Fairplay. Breckenridge, we won't have any food whatsoever, but we're on Main Street, so you can carry it in.
Right there,
yeah. And if somebody else is doing the food for you, that's great. But to Michael's point, if a food truck commits to you and doesn't show up, I've heard endless horror stories of breweries that are dependent on food trucks coming and they don't show up. And, there's a lot of that in the food truck world. But, personally, where we're controlling our own quote unquote food truck, part of it for us is the service model. And where we are in Summit County, it's exceptionally hard to get people. The cost of living is at the top in the country, and maintaining good levels of service, especially on the food side, is really, really hard to do. So we're changing our food model so that it'll look like an indoor food truck, literally, and then people know what to do. They'll walk in, they'll walk up to the window, order their food, get a text when their food's ready, and then they order their beers or cocktails from the bar. That changes people's expectations. That's essentially what we're doing in Fairplay right now, and the reception's been way better, both for the food and the beer. So it kind of is proving our case. And in Frisco, I think we're going to definitely lose a significant portion of people that want to come in and be waited on. But we're okay with that because our labor costs will go down substantially. Also, having that food truck model will allow us to share the tips with the kitchen, which then will allow us to retain top talent in the kitchen. So
it's always go to your model. Like, what is your business model for doing it too?
Yeah.
Like we keep relating this, always throw that into the good, the bad, the ugly. I think food is good. I come from the food background, restaurant business, and then working for the Walnut Brewery, where, I think food and beer go together, and I think they add to your ticket. Plus, you're trained through tips training too, that you want people to consume, so you want them to eat while they drink. It slows the process of the body metabolizing the alcohol. Am I saying that right? Processing the alcohol through your liver, that your blood alcohol level will stay in control, right? You want to protect your consumer as much as you want to protect yourself. I love that, and I think adding to your ticket price is huge. If you can add that sales to it, why not? The bad side is can you run a restaurant? And to the point someone says they're partners in the restaurant business, that's awesome.
Yeah.
If you have someone who understands that, and I've had the conversation again to brewery owners, and someone was going to open a brewery and a full-size restaurant. They've never brewed to scale and they've never run a restaurant. I'm like, please hire people, because it's two separate monsters that you have to manage, right? The ugly side is, to your point, is you could get beat up, right? If it's all under one, right? It's the food wasn't good, but the beer was good. Well, they're going to beat you up. And so
the
I was
service
thinking,
as well.
all right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, like, yeah, trying to run that service side is the hardest thing, given the cost of living and everything that everybody's experienced over the last couple of years, not only in our situation but everywhere else. And I mean, any restaurant, if you look at the margins, it's all on alcohol,
Right.
and food is just a byproduct of that.
Correct.
Unless you're, either really big and your business model is scale and selling a lot, or you're really high end or whatever. But brew pubs typically aren't that. So,
and I always say keep your menu simple. I mean, you don't have to have it really complicated. And so to the point of where breweries who do use food trucks, if you build a great relationship with those food trucks, you usually have the ones that always come back on a consistent basis. But the other piece of it is if people who are coming to your brewery are not going out there and spending money at a food truck, they're not going to come back for you too. So, I mean, it's like anything else, it's a catch-22, but I love the aspect of adding food to it. I think really, again, goes back to where you want them to eat while they're having beer or drinking beer. I think it extends, it increases the stay time, which can be a bad thing for you, except for they might order 2 beers, right? And then they might order the t-shirt,
Yeah.
There's a plus to it for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll say one other thing too on the just backtracking. I keep hearing the good, bad, the ugly. One thing that just popped in my head about lawyers, which is kind of sidetracking. Everybody, loves, especially as business owners, loves to say, "Oh, lawyers, they all suck," all that kind of thing. Well, no. A lot of them are out there really trying to help, and one of the hardest things I think is trying to find somebody that really will help you. And if you're vetting a lawyer, one thing that you can look for is somebody who's always looking to compromise and negotiate. That's the best lawyer you can find as a business person, because if they're just going to dig their heels in and fight, that's not somebody that you want, because that's going to cost you time and money, and the benefits don't help. I mean, standing on principle is not something that is worth doing.
Oh, so the only time you use the word principle, if you're talking about physics, or you're
right, or you're talking about beer,
right, right, or school, right? You're the principal of the school.
Yeah.
Don't stand on your principles.
Yeah.
It costs you too much money.
Yeah.
Your time value money, you talk about all the time. Absolutely. Okay, so what did you learn from your first brewery to opening your second brewery? So we talked about everything encompassing all the good, the bad, and the ugly. What really helped you be successful? Because I mean, I call it when he laughs.
Sheer
I've seen his
will.
financials.
No.
2 locations. I mean, think about it. You have Frisco. You open up Fairplay, and Breckenridge should be opening soon. So a little bit of a process, but that's amazing. You have 3 locations where people are just trying to open up one.
Yeah, and God. Well, it's funny. I mean, that question I laughed at, because all the lessons that I learned, I wasn't able to apply because I was choked off from my financing. And so I was in a really frustrating position for 4 years, where I was fighting a legal battle. I was choked off from cash, and it was just, how do we survive?
Right.
And so I couldn't really apply a lot of the lessons that I had learned. Now, moving forward to where we are now, I can apply that. I can diversify. I can lower my costs. I can own my space. I have partners that are completely aligned with us. We have agreements in place. If they want out, because they're getting older, so if they want to cash out, we have agreements in place for that. We have very strong personal and business relationships. We check in on a very regular basis. We vet everything. We still come across shady characters. And still end up in places where we have deals that won't work out. But diversification and putting our assets in different places is one of the biggest things. Like now we do have Fairplay, we do have Breckenridge, we do have Frisco, and if one of those 3 shall fall, no problem.
Right.
We can adjust and change, and so our eggs aren't in one basket. So that's one way that we're able to apply those things. Another is owning our space, which again, Michael's in the process of helping us on that space in Frisco, which hopefully will be done pretty soon, by the end of the year, I would think. And yeah, I think I'm able to apply some of those lessons. Others, the world deals you different cards, and you can't quite, follow through on it. But you just batten down the hatches and get through it, and then look for the opportunities to do better.
Yeah, learn from the mistakes. Right. Definitely. So then, what are your top 3 things you suggest? And it doesn't have to be 3. I'm sure it could be 10. But suggest for everyone listening when top 3 things you suggest they do for starting a brewery or planning their first brewery.
Top 3 things. Yeah, I mean, I think we've said it a lot. Just advice: surround yourself with people smarter than you, and ask the questions you're afraid to ask, and listen.
Right.
I mean, I think that's my best piece of advice is to listen. Constantly look at yourself and your own ego, and try to put that aside. Realize what actually makes sense from the numbers, and what is just your ego getting in the way.
We always say check your ego. Like when you're having these financial conversations, especially, it's check your ego. Like it's sometimes it's hard. You might get kicked a little bit, but the goal is to get you out of the position. Or sometimes it's, listen, we're going to help you improve. Yeah, right? We're going to move you to your second location. You're going to buy your second building. Yeah.
Yeah, and also be skeptical. Constantly, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably is.
Right.
I mean, it's funny. I sit here and I'm listening to myself, and almost everything I'm talking about just reminds me of all the lessons that the mountain taught me. Skiing, kayaking, all of that kind of stuff. The world will teach you those lessons one way or the other.
I don't ski anymore, but when I used to ski, I used this advice to when I skied and into the business world or people trying anything new. I said, it was just when I became really good at skiing, I could ski a double black, I could ski the trees, ski the moguls, was recovery. No matter how good you are, your skis are going to cross, right? You're going to clack, separate, whatever, or all of a sudden there's a tree where you just didn't realize, right? You catch an edge. It's all about recovery. Yeah. It's about, I'm not going to crash, right? I'm not going to fail and hit the ground. I'm going to stay upright. So I've always used that philosophy. That's it, like recovery, no matter what you do.
Well, that's one of the funniest things. I don't know how many of you guys know what Highside is, but it's a rafting term for an emergency situation where your boat's about to flip. You've got a big wave, you're sideways to it, your boat starts rising up, and you call a high side, and everybody climbs up to the high side, and you might get through and not flip, or if you're not all together with that, you're going to flip, and that's that.
And as a raft guide, what do you teach them, right? You teach them how to try to prevent the boat from flipping, right? But what else do you teach them?
Yeah, recovery. Once you're in the water, what's the first thing you do? You grab onto the boat, you swim to shore, you watch us in terms of the signals, don't panic is the biggest thing, just to your point. And and that's the funny thing. It's going to happen. Everything that you think is going to go right, it won't.
Oh yeah.
And it's how you deal with it. We used to, as kayakers, in whitewater when we were surfing, playing in big waves, and you'd go to the next step, and this thing looked intimidating as hell. It was something that you just avoid like the plague. But now you're in a playboat surfing it and doing spins and stuff. And and one of my friends and I one time go, hey, what's the difference between playing and getting worked? and we said it's the smile on your face.
Yes, there you go. Yeah.
So if you can smile through it, you're good. If you think your life's in danger, you've probably gone too far. You need to go on a smaller wave.
A little bit of that philosophy. So we laugh at what life throws you. So at 9:06 this morning, I look at my cell phone and Axe is calling me. Axe, of course, he lives up in Frisco, Breckenridge area. He's like, hey, I'm in a ditch. And sure enough, he was in the ditch with multiple other vehicles. They were receiving snow up in the mountain too, right? You tell it what's going to come your way. And I never thought about a contingency plan is if Axe can't be here, what am I going to present on this podcast? I'm like, oh my, I started scrambling. I'm calling Aaron. Aaron, what if he has to dial in? Can we do that? Or maybe we can do a different presentation. Luckily he was able to he was okay. Everybody's okay. All the vehicles out of the ditch and get here. But that's kind of it. It's like, all right, what am I going to do? You had to figure out how to get out of the ditch. I had to figure out, what am I going to do? Are you going to call in? Because I don't know what to tell everybody here.
Yeah.
Does beer only work these days? Or do you need a beer wine? Oh, good question.
Yeah, Robert. I mean, I think that's it's dependent on the location and the demand in that particular location. We still do probably close to 90% of our alcohol sales are beer. Having wine and spirits, I think it can help a certain segment of the population, but then it's going to depend on how big is your tap room, how much space do you have to accommodate that extra. What are you going for? Are you just going for the beer geek crowd, or do you want the families and that bigger population? So I think beer only does work dependent on the location. That's what we're doing in Fairplay, is beer only, and that's a conscious choice. We could have done a liquor license there, but one of the reasons to do that in Colorado is that keeps us out of the health department's crosshairs, and that allows dogs, and that, to me, dogs are a bigger draw than wine and cocktail.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we were up there for the grand opening.
Yeah.
My buddy that I ride with, he's a veterinarian, and I kept joking. I go, just start handing out your card.
Yeah.
Dogs were coming in the door. So, and I agree. To me, it's really, if you're going to be beer only, what's the draw? What are people going to do? In Fairplay, there's pinball, pool, horseshoes, which I still think is dangerous.
Yeah.
I still don't understand that. Helping set up a horseshoe game. People are drinking and throwing an iron horseshoe.
Yeah.
But anyways,
kids and dogs running around.
Yeah, kids and dogs.
Insurance agents, what dream there.
So I think, that's it. You really have to have a draw, and that's where I go personally. And I suggest is, food. There's got to be other reasons. And nowadays, the expectation is, right, you want to bring your dog. There has to be activities. You have to keep moving. And again, that's going to help your beer sales as you keep that moving along. Again, Robert, boy, he's got a lot of questions there.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I don't know the backstory and the priority.
Yeah. I'll say.
Yeah. So great advice to things. What about advice for opening a second location, or you're not in distribution, what's the advice if they really want to go to their second location? Is there a reference for that?
Yeah, that's just
okay. You can't say it.
Second location, demand, bandwidth, lots of factors to consider. Also, dilution of the brand. Especially in a crowded market these days, I think it's really difficult to tell how it's going to be received. You might have some data based on keg sales in that particular market where you're going for a second location. For us, with the first brewery, the second location was going to be Frisco. That was a no-brainer. Town right next to it.
Oh yeah.
We already knew the sales from the brewery that was having a lot of issues. So we thought we could do a lot better. We also were looking at opening a second location on Main Street in Breckenridge, and we knew the numbers there as well. So it's know your market in terms of that, but then also know your bandwidth. Like what are you, at some point you got to stop looking at, can I, and it's should I,
right.
What are your personal goals in terms of work-life balance, everything else. That's something I'm certainly looking to rein in and get back to after this year of great change and challenge in the last really 10 years. Since starting the first brewery, just working continuously on really big stuff and things that do keep you awake at night over and over again. And I never had a problem sleeping before getting into this stuff. And that certainly changed. A lot of
encouraging word why you should open a brewery.
Yeah. If you don't like sleep, then open a brewery. But alcohol helps. Not really. It's all those factors. And if you have a spouse, do you want to keep that spouse?
Right.
You have kids, that kind of thing. Work-life balance. What are your priorities? So not only market and can I, but hey, should I?
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think people, it goes back to the distribution piece of it. It's like, I'm going to make so much money. If I could open a second location, I'm going to make more money.
Yeah.
Are you really? What are the rents? You talk about you're in downtown Breck, but man, right? The rents are really expensive. Can you really support the sales that are going to take care of that? So what if, what if the current brewery starts to fail? Can this one sustain you? We have the conversation. Fairplay's doing really well. So I think you really need to analyze the financial piece of it. To your point, emotionally, do you want? And the other thing is, what's your ultimate plan? I always say that keep with your business plan. What is your goal? Is your goal always to open a second location? Yeah. Are you opening it because someone goes, oh, you'll make more money? Yeah. Like that's not the way this works, right? I mean, you can, but that's not always the way it works. Did you want to grow to that second location? Do you really want to be out in 10 years? To your point is, do you have a family or do you want to go try something new? So I take all these into consideration. I think it really helps. St. Louis.
There were some previous questions too about folks that were looking to open soon and that kind of thing. Let's see, earlier, I think even.
I think we covered that one.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we did. So any questions, let me know as my cursor stops too. We've been trying to answer as we go. Maybe I can get, there it goes. Get back to the bottom of it. I know we keep chatting along. People have been chiming in. Any questions? Any questions for Axe or any questions on the financial side? We're happy to answer. Aaron, I don't know if there was questions that we might have missed. I think we covered them all through the chat, but I wasn't sure. You said there's a ask a question section. I don't think anybody filled that in.
There's a funny thing going back to your original comment on bankers versus tax. When I started off, I was always looking at, trying not to have to pay taxes. Really not to avoid taxes, but really so that we could keep our cash and reinvest it and keep building the business. Right. And the irony of that is just what you said, which is that bankers need you to show that profit, right, so that they can lend you more and you can leverage that. And I mean, honestly, money that you can get from Untapped or from a bank is the best money you can ever get relative to giving equity to somebody, because they're a partner in a really professional way where, sure, they're going to take their cut, but they're also going to help you achieve your goals because your success is tied together and they make their money off the interest. They don't need to make it off of your profits.
Right. And we've already looked at your cash model or cash flow model is you can afford this, right? Unless things change in your sales, yeah, it's you can afford to do this. Where a partner might be like, I want out, buy me out.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too, the assumptions that you make. I mean, getting into the, I'll tell another ugly story too from getting into the second brewery. So
it's not all perfect once you open your second one.
Oh my God. It was, I was burnt out from 5 years of the first one with all the success in the world. And, the second one with the contract should have been, easy. I was going to have managers run everything and we were going to own our space, our building. We were going to, do all of these things. We had a lease that was the most ridiculous thing you've ever seen in your life, which actually ends in less than a week. But
that's right.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's 5 years. But we had our company lawyer look over the lease, and she said, "I would never let you sign this lease. This is the worst thing I've ever seen in the world, except for the fact that I know you have a contract to buy the real estate, and you've already been pre-approved for the bank for that amount. So that's the only pretense under which I would say sign this lease because you'll never have to live under it."
Huh?
Well, I lived under it for 5 years.
4 years, 11 months.
Yeah. Yeah. Days, hours, minutes, yeah, for sure. My partner has certainly been counting those. And every bit of that lease we had to fulfill, and it crushed us. And it strangled us in terms of all the different things that we wanted to do, as well as having to raise the money to fight the arbitration case to enforce the contract for mediation. So Highside was a war, and then we had a pandemic in the middle of it too, just to cap that off.
Sure.
And it's crazy what what happened. So opening your second brewery, while I had all the experience, and that's the only thing that allowed me to get through, was I did know how to have these conversations. People had seen my track record. They, very serious business people came in and believed in me and backed me. Financially, I put together a really good team, people that I knew and trusted in the industry, like Thomas before that. John was fantastic as our brewer. And then I also just relied on those folks. My general manager, Kurt.
That's what I was thinking of, yeah.
Kurt's a great guy, buddy that I started teaching skiing with 25 years ago. And Kurt was running golf courses, so he was a PGA pro.
And it really is the beer again, right? Just do everything but the beer world and join in. So to the person's question, is it important to work in the brewery?
Yeah.
Go start a business in another country and run a golf course.
And you see it now a lot more, big money coming into the beer world and trying to get a piece of it. I was just at a brewery back home in Chicago, and they won a bunch of awards this year. And turns out it's not your little corner craft brewery. It's part of a giant restaurant chain.
Good for them.
And they hired some really good brewers.
Yeah.
And they're making some great beers. It kind of goes against why most of us get into it, which is, do your thing and concentrate on your community and give back and that kind of thing. But that's kind of where the market is. And, another sort of thing that you have to think about is something that they talked about in business school a lot that keeps coming back is this concept of sustainable differentiation.
Everybody write that down. Just say that again.
Big words. Sustainable differentiation. What the hell is it? And how do the market's going to catch up if there's money involved in something? There's going to be other players. They're going to be more sophisticated than you are. They're going to know a lot more than you are. So how is it? Where's your edge? Where's your differentiator? At Highside and from where I came from, I was the most requested ski instructor at Breckenridge for the time that I was there. It was relationships and building those relationships. And then the service side of it, was really big in terms of what I thought I could do differently. I didn't think I could brew a better beer than anybody else, but I could bring people along who will teach me how to be better at making a better beer or figuring out a better service model. The restaurant side of it is so complicated too. And so know where your strengths lie and lean on that, and then hire other people around you that can do other pieces to really fill in those gaps.
Oh yeah, it's key to fill the gap. I was just checking, so there's a thread going with it. Make sure my CEO or Janelle didn't have a question, because we're also, so at the same time, Tony's at MSU giving a presentation, because we partner with them. So I think this is great. Hopefully a lot of good advice for everyone else. I don't see any more questions coming in. We have plenty more beer to drink, but we don't have time to drink it. Then Axis, you're leaving tonight or tomorrow? Tomorrow.
Yeah.
The snow to go to Atlanta. Savannah, Georgia. Sorry. Yeah. So a lot of good time. Unless we have any other questions, Aaron.
I think you guys got through all the questions.
Nice.
So I didn't
watch them as they popped up.
Yeah, that was great. So if anyone does have any questions that they think of after this, I will be sure to have Mike's contact. Ax, if you're okay with it, I can send an email address for you as well, just for a follow-up when I send the recording. And once another reminder that this is recorded, so this is available to go back and use as a resource. So thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I hope everyone enjoyed the presentation, and we will see you next month.
All right.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers, everybody.